The dust-laden wind carried the scent of sage and cattle as Cordelia Rose clutched her weathered carpetbag, watching the stagecoach that had delivered her to Veta, Colorado, disappear back into the vastness of the frontier. The year was 1883, and the bustling mining and ranching town nestled at the base of the Spanish Peaks represented her last chance at a respectable life after fleeing the ruins of her family's bakery in Chicago following her parents' deaths from influenza. Veta's Main Street bustled with activity despite the afternoon heat. Merchants hawked their wares, miners and cowboys crowded the saloon, and horses stomped impatiently at hitching posts. Cordelia's gaze settled on the weathered sign hanging from the general store. Cook wanted. Diamond a ranch inquire within. The bell above the door jangled as Cordelia entered the general store. A portly man with spectacles perched on his nose glanced up from behind the counter. "Afternoon, miss. How might I help you today?" "I've come about the cooking position at Diamond a Ranch," Cordelia said, her voice steadier than she felt. The shopkeeper gave her an appraising look. "You don't look like our usual applicants. Most are widows or older women looking for steady work." "I ran my family's bakery in Chicago for 5 years before." She faltered, unwilling to share her tragedy with a stranger. "I can cook for 20 men without batting an eye, sir." Before the shopkeeper could respond, the door opened behind her. Cordelia turned to see a tall man filling the doorframe, his broad shoulders blocking the afternoon light. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, tanned from long days in the sun. "Mr. Albert," the man nodded to the shopkeeper. "Those fence supplies arrive yet. Morning, Vaughn. Should be here tomorrow." The shopkeeper gestured toward Cordelia. "This young lady's inquiring about your cook position." The cowboy's eyes flicked toward her, assessing her with a single glance that made Cordelia straighten her spine. His eyes were an unusual shade of blue-gray, like the sky before a storm. "Vaughn Alexander," he said simply, extending a calloused hand. "Foreman of Diamond A." "Cordelia Rose," she replied, placing her hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle. "Can you cook, Miss Rose?" His question was direct, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "Better than anyone west of the Mississippi, Mr. Alexander," she replied with more confidence than she felt. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Bold claim. Ranch is 5 miles out. 20 hungry men up before dawn, working till dusk. Previous cook left 2 weeks ago without warning. Kitchen's a mess. Men are surly from bad food." "I'm not afraid of hard work or surly men, Mr. Alexander. Wages are $30 a month, room and board included." "40, Cordelia countered. "If I'm feeding 20 men 3 meals a day, 7 days a week." The shopkeeper coughed in surprise, but Vaughn's expression remained impassive. 35, and you get Sundays to yourself after breakfast." "Done," she agreed. "Got any belongings besides that bag, a trunk?" "It should arrive on tomorrow's stage." Vaughn nodded. "I'll send someone to collect it. Got business to finish in town. Meet me at the livery in an hour. I'll drive you out to the ranch." As Vaughn exited, the shopkeeper shook his head. "First time I've seen him say more than 10 words at once, miss, and I've known him 5 years." Cordelia smiled. "I have that effect on people sometimes, Mr. Albert." "Word of warning, miss," the shopkeeper added, lowering his voice. "Diamond A's owner, Judge Anderson, is fair but demands results, and Vaughn Alexander—" He paused, came back from the war changed, keeps to himself. "Best foreman in the county, but not much for conversation. Men respect him, but they don't cross him." "Thank you for the information," Cordelia replied, gathering her carpetbag. "I'll keep it in mind." An hour later, Cordelia sat beside Vaughn in a wagon loaded with supplies, bouncing along the rutted trail that led to Diamond Ranch. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably as the town receded behind them. "What brings you to Veta, Miss Rose?" Vaughn finally asked, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "A fresh start," she answered, deciding honesty was simplest. "My parents died last winter, influenza. The bakery we owned had debts I couldn't pay off alone." Vaughn nodded as if her explanation was sufficient. "Sorry for your loss." "And you, Mr. Alexander, how did you come to be foreman of Diamond A?" A muscle in his jaw tightened. "Fought for the Union. Met Judge Anderson's son during the war. When Ben didn't come home, the judge offered me work." The simplicity of his answer held volumes of unspoken grief. "I see," Cordelia said softly. "I'm sorry for his loss, and yours." They fell silent again as the wagon crested a hill, revealing a sprawling ranch nestled in a valley below. A large two-story main house dominated the property, with a bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings arranged around it. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and in the distance, the Spanish peaks provided a majestic backdrop. "It's beautiful," Cordelia breathed. "It's home," Vaughn replied simply, but she caught a hint of pride in his voice. As they approached the ranch, men paused in their work to observe the wagon's arrival. Cordelia felt their curious gazes and lifted her chin. She had faced worse challenges than the skepticism of ranch hands. Vaughn brought the wagon to a halt near the main house. "Kitchen's through there," he said, nodding toward a side entrance. "Your quarters are attached to the back. Judge Anderson is away on business in Denver. He'll be back in a week." Before she could respond, a lanky young man approached the wagon. "New cook?" he asked, grinning broadly. "Miss Rose, this is Tommy," Vaughn said. "Ranch hand and resident nuisance." Tommy tipped his hat. "Pleasure, madam. Fair warning, we're all half-starved. Last fellow could burn water." "I'll keep that in mind," Cordelia replied with a smile. Vaughn jumped down from the wagon and came around to offer her assistance. His hands were strong at her waist as he lifted her down, the brief contact sending an unexpected warmth through her. "Tommy, show Miss Rose to her quarters and help with her bag," Vaughn instructed. "I need to check on the south pasture before sundown." As Vaughn walked away, Tommy collected her carpet bag. "Don't mind the boss," he said cheerfully. "Not much for words, but fair as they come." "How long has he been foreman?" Cordelia asked as they walked toward the kitchen entrance. "Since '68. Built this place up from nearly nothing after the judge's son was killed at Gettysburg. Heard he didn't speak more than necessary for the first year he was here." The kitchen was spacious, but, as Vaughn had warned, in disarray. A large wood stove dominated one wall, with a massive work table in the center. Shelves lined with dusty preserves and staples covered another wall, while copper pots hung neglected from hooks on the ceiling. "Dining areas through there," Tommy said, pointing to double doors. "Men eat in shifts when they can. Breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, supper after chores." "And my quarters?" Cordelia asked. Tommy led her through another door at the back of the kitchen to a small but tidy room. It contained a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a small window overlooking a kitchen garden gone wild with weeds. "Not much, but private," Tommy said apologetically. "It's perfect," Cordelia replied, meaning it. After sharing a room above the bakery with her parents for years, this small space felt like a luxury. "I'll leave you to get settled. Supper's usually at 6, but—" Tommy shrugged. "I'll have something ready," Cordelia assured him, "even if it's simple." After Tommy left, Cordelia surveyed the kitchen with growing determination. She rolled up her sleeves and tied on the clean apron she'd packed in her carpet bag. First, She needed to assess what supplies were available and establish order in the chaos. 2 hours later, with the kitchen considerably cleaner and a hearty beef stew simmering on the stove, Cordelia wiped perspiration from her brow. She'd found dried beans, root vegetables, and salted beef in the pantry, along with flour and other basics. A quick trip to the root cellar had yielded potatoes and onions. It wasn't fancy, but it would fill hungry stomachs. At precisely 6 o'clock, the first group of ranch hands filed into the dining area. Their skepticism was evident as they eyed the new female cook, but the aroma of stew and fresh biscuits seemed to ease their wariness. Cordelia served them confidently, meeting each man's gaze as she introduced herself. The second shift of men arrived as the first was finishing, with Vaughn among them. He watched silently as Cordelia served his plate, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Miss Rose," he said quietly as she handed him a steaming bowl. "You're welcome, Mr. Alexander," she replied. "It's simple fare tonight, but I'll have a proper menu established by tomorrow." He nodded and took his place at the head of the long table. Cordelia noticed how the men naturally deferred to him, leaving that spot vacant until his arrival. As she continued serving, she overheard snippets of conversation talk of cattle, fence mending, and a potential problem with rustlers on the far edge of Diamond land. The men were careful with their language in her presence, she noted with amusement. When the meal concluded, Cordelia was surprised when several men brought their dishes back to the kitchen. "Mighty fine stew, Miss Rose," said an older man with a weathered face. "Best meal we've had in months." "Thank you, mister." "Just Doc," he replied with a smile. "Used to patch up soldiers during the war. Now I patch up cowboys and cattle." As the kitchen emptied, Vaughn appeared in the doorway. Men were pleased with the meal. "High praise from hungry cowboys," Cordelia said, placing the last clean dish on the shelf. "You've done well with the kitchen already." His eyes surveyed the organized space. "Thank you. I'll need to make a list of supplies to replenish the pantry." "Make your list. We'll send someone to town in 2 days." He hesitated, then added, "Your room suitable?" "Very much so, thank you." He nodded, turning to leave. "Mr. Alexander," Cordelia called after him, causing him to pause. "What time should I have breakfast ready in the morning?" 5. "Men start early. I'll be ready." After he left, Cordelia finished cleaning up, then retired to her small room. Exhaustion swept over her as she sat on the edge of the bed. She'd traveled hundreds of miles, secured a position, and served her first meal to 20 hungry men all in a single day. As she changed into her nightdress and brushed out her chestnut hair, she found herself thinking of the quiet foreman with the storm cloud eyes. Dawn was still a promise on the horizon when Cordelia rose the next morning. She dressed quickly in a simple blue cotton dress and pinned her hair up neatly before heading to the kitchen. By the time the first ranch hands began shuffling in at 5 o'clock, she had hot coffee brewing, a massive pan of biscuits fresh from the oven, eggs and bacon frying, and a pot of oatmeal steaming on the back of the stove. "Morning, Miss Rose," Tommy greeted, his eyes widening at the spread. "You've been busy." "Good morning," she replied cheerfully, handing him a cup of coffee. "I believe in starting the day properly fed." The kitchen filled with appreciative murmurs as the men collected their breakfast. Vaughn was among the first to arrive, already dressed for the day's work. He accepted a plate with a quiet thank you and a look that might have been surprise. "Sleep well, Miss Rose?" he asked as she poured his coffee. "Very well, thank you. And yourself?" "Well enough." He glanced around the kitchen. "You've been up some time." "I'm accustomed to early hours, Mr. Alexander. A baker's day starts before dawn." He nodded, taking his plate to join the men. Cordelia continued serving, learning more names and faces as the morning progressed. By the time the last man had been fed, she had a better sense of the ranch's hierarchy and the dynamics among the hands. The next several days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Cordelia rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent mornings baking bread and planning future meals, served dinner at noon, and then prepared supper for the evening. Between meals, she tackled the abandoned kitchen garden, clearing weeds and discovering that many herbs and vegetables were still thriving beneath the neglect. On her fourth day at Diamond A, Cordelia was kneeling in the garden, harvesting fresh herbs, when a shadow fell across her work. Looking up, she found Vaughn watching her. "Making yourself at home," he observed. "The garden was too good to waste," she replied, standing and brushing dirt from her apron. "These herbs will improve the meals considerably." He nodded, then seemed to remember something. "Your trunk arrived." "It's on the porch." "Oh, thank you. I was beginning to worry it had been lost. Need help moving it to your room, if you wouldn't mind. It's rather heavy." Together they carried the trunk to her quarters. As Vaughn set his end down, his gaze caught on a small framed photograph on her dresser. "Your family?" he asked. "Yes," Cordelia replied, following his gaze to the image of herself with her parents, taken just a year before their deaths. "My parents, James and Eleanor." Vaughn studied the image for a moment. "You have your father's eyes." The personal observation surprised her. "So I've been told." An awkward silence fell between them. Vaughn cleared his throat. "Judge Anderson returns tomorrow. He'll want to meet you." "Of course. Is there anything special I should prepare?" "He's partial to apple pie," Vaughn said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "If that helps," Cordelia smiled. "It does indeed, thank you." As Vaughn turned to leave, Cordelia impulsively asked, "Mr. Alexander, might I trouble you for some information?" He paused. "What sort? About the men? Their preferences, dislikes?" "I've noticed Mr. Simmons avoids onions, and Tommy seems to have a particular fondness for anything sweet." Vaughn's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You've been paying attention. It's my job to feed them properly. That means understanding what they enjoy." He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "Doc can't abide anything too spicy, stomach troubles. Pete's allergic to strawberries, makes him break out in hives. Old Charlie's missing half his teeth, so nothing too tough for him." He paused, then added, "And I prefer coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in." Cordelia laughed. "I've noticed. Your cup gets an extra scoop of grounds." Surprise flickered across his face. "You've been paying more attention than I realized." "I observe people, Mr. Alexander. Always have." She met his gaze directly. "You, for instance, always make sure everyone else has food before serving yourself. You check that the younger hands eat enough, and you've fixed 3 loose boards in the kitchen floor when you thought I wasn't looking." Vaughn shifted uncomfortably under her assessment. "Floors needed fixing." "Yes, they did, thank you." He nodded awkwardly. "Need to get back to work. Men are bringing in cattle from the South Range today." After he left, Cordelia smiled to herself as she unpacked her trunk. The taciturn foreman was beginning to intrigue her more than she cared to admit. The following afternoon, Judge Anderson arrived at the ranch. Cordelia had spent the morning preparing a special dinner, including the apple pie Vaughn had suggested. She heard the judge's arrival from the kitchen, a flurry of activity as men greeted him, and took his horse. Moments later, the kitchen door opened, and a distinguished older gentleman entered, followed by Vaughn. The judge was tall and straight-backed despite his 60-some years, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. "Miss Rose," Vaughn said formally. "Judge William Anderson, owner of Diamond A." Cordelia wiped her hands on her apron and curtsied slightly. "An honor to meet you, sir." "So you're the miracle worker my men have been writing about," the judge said with a warm smile. "Vaughn's last 2 letters mentioned nothing but praise for your cooking." Cordelia glanced at Vaughn in surprise, but his expression revealed nothing. "I'm hardly a miracle worker, sir," she replied modestly. "Just someone who believes ranch hands deserve good food for their hard work." The judge laughed. "Diplomatic as well as talented. I'm pleased to have you at Diamond A, Miss Rose." The bunkhouse has never been so peaceful, according to Vaughn. "Well-fed men make happy workers." "Thank you, sir. I've prepared a special dinner to welcome you home. It should be ready in about half an hour." "Wonderful. I've been dreaming of a home-cooked meal for weeks." "Denver hotel food is abominable." He turned to leave, then added, "Oh, and Miss Rose, I've brought mail from town. There's a letter for you." The judge handed her an envelope before departing with Vaughn. Cordelia immediately recognized her aunt's handwriting and tucked the letter into her pocket to read later. Dinner was a success. The judge regaled the men with tales from Denver between appreciative bites of roast beef and vegetables from Cordelia's rejuvenated garden. When she brought out the apple pie still warm from the oven, a cheer went up from the hands. "Miss Rose," the judge declared after his first bite, "this pie alone would justify your wages. Absolutely magnificent." "Thank you, sir," Cordelia replied, pleased by his reaction, and the approving nod from Vaughn at the table's end. After the meal, when the men had dispersed to evening chores and the judge retired to his study, Cordelia finally had a moment to read her aunt's letter. She sat on her bed, breaking the seal with anticipation. The letter contained concerning news. Her aunt's health was failing, and the family bakery in Chicago had been sold to cover the remaining debts. There would be no going back, even if Cordelia wanted to. The letter closed with a plea for Cordelia to find security and perhaps a suitable husband in Colorado. Cordelia folded the letter carefully, her emotions mixed. The finality of losing the bakery stung, but she had already begun to feel at home at Diamond A. As for her aunt's matrimonial hopes, Cordelia smiled ruefully. She hadn't come west to find a husband, merely a position that would allow her to support herself honorably. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Rose," Vaughn's voice called. "Judge Anderson would like to speak with you if you're available." Cordelia tucked the letter away and smoothed her dress. "Of course. I'll be right there." She followed Vaughn to the main house and into the judge's study, a wood-paneled room lined with books and adorned with mounted animal heads that Cordelia found slightly disconcerting. "Ah, Miss Rose," the judge greeted her, rising from behind his desk. "Please sit down. Vaughn, you too." Once they were seated, the judge continued. "Miss Rose, I wanted to formally welcome you to Diamond and discuss your position here. Vaughn tells me you've transformed not just the kitchen but the morale of my men." "I've simply tried to do my job well, sir." "Modesty is admirable, but I recognize excellence when I see it." The judge leaned forward. "I'm prepared to offer you a permanent position here, with a salary of $40 per month, the figure you originally requested, I believe." Cordelia glanced at Vaughn, whose lips quirked in the barest hint of a smile. "That's very generous, sir," she replied. "Additionally, I'm organizing a social gathering 3 weeks from Saturday. Ranchers from across the county, some business associates from Denver, local townspeople. Would you be willing to oversee the preparation of food for the event? I'd provide additional help from town and pay you extra, of course." "I would be delighted, sir." "Excellent. Vaughn will provide whatever assistance you require." The judge turned to Vaughn. "Speaking of which, I'd like you to take Miss Rose into town tomorrow to order supplies for both regular needs and the gathering. The supply wagon needs repair, so you'll need to take the buckboard." Vaughn nodded. Yes, sir. After finalizing details for the upcoming event, Cordelia was dismissed. Vaughn walked her back to the kitchen entrance. "Congratulations on the raise," he said quietly. "Thank you. And thank you for recommending me to the judge." Told him the truth. "Men work better with good food in their bellies." He paused. "We'll leave for town at 9 tomorrow if that suits." "I'll be ready," Cordelia promised. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for the journey to town. After serving breakfast and leaving a cold dinner prepared for the men, Cordelia changed into her best day dress, a forest green cotton with minimal adornment, and added a straw bonnet to protect against the sun. Vaughn was waiting with the buckboard when she emerged, dressed in cleaner clothes than his usual work attire and freshly shaved. The transformation made him look younger, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw and the remarkable color of his eyes. "You look nice," he said simply as he helped her onto the seat. Cordelia felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you. So do you." The journey to town passed more comfortably than their first trip together. Vaughn seemed more inclined to conversation, pointing out landmarks and sharing brief anecdotes about the area's history. Cordelia, in turn, told him about her life in Chicago and her experiences running the family bakery. "You miss it?" he asked. "Baking, I mean." "Every day," she admitted. "There's something deeply satisfying about working with dough, creating something both beautiful and nourishing." Vaughn nodded thoughtfully. "Should talk to the judge about adding some baking equipment to the kitchen. Men would appreciate fresh bread daily." "That would be wonderful," Cordelia replied, touched by his consideration. In town, they moved efficiently from the general store to the butcher to the mercantile, ordering supplies for both daily needs and the upcoming social event. Cordelia was impressed by Vaughn's attention to detail and his willingness to defer to her expertise regarding food. As they loaded their purchases into the buckboard, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon, voices raised in anger. "Wait here," Vaughn instructed, his expression darkening as he moved toward the disturbance. Cordelia, never one to follow orders blindly, followed at a discreet distance. As she approached, she could see the confrontation more clearly. 3 rough-looking men were surrounding a young woman whose terrified expression made Cordelia's heart race. "Told you last time, Blackwell," Vaughn's voice cut through the tension. "You're not welcome in Veta." The largest of the men turned, revealing a scarred face and cold eyes. "Alexander." "Still playing watchdog for this town. Step away from the lady," Vaughn said evenly. Blackwell sneered. "This ain't Diamond-a-Land. You got no authority here. I'm making it my business." Vaughn's stance shifted subtly, and Cordelia noticed his hand resting near the gun at his hip. For a tense moment, it seemed violence was inevitable. Then Blackwell spat on the ground and laughed. "Not worth my time today, but we'll settle up eventually, Alexander." He nodded to his companions. "Come on, boys. Place stinks anyway." As the men mounted their horses and rode out of town, Vaughn approached the young woman, speaking quietly to her. The small crowd that had gathered began to disperse, several men nodding respectfully to Vaughn as they returned to their business. Cordelia waited by the buckboard until Vaughn returned, his expression grim. "I apologize for the delay," he said stiffly. "Those men are trouble, been rustling cattle across the county." "Is the young woman all right?" Cordelia asked. "Sarah?" "Yes, she works at the hotel." "Blackwell's been harassing her for weeks." He helped Cordelia onto the seat. "Sheriff's never around when needed." As they left town, Cordelia studied Vaughn's profile. "That was brave, what you did." "Wasn't brave, was necessary." He glanced at her. "Men like Blackwell only understand one thing: someone standing up to them." You have experience with such men. Vaughn's hands tightened on the reins, enough to recognize them. The rest of the journey passed in relative silence, but Cordelia sensed it was a comfortable one. Vaughn seemed deep in thought, occasionally glancing her way when he thought she wasn't looking. Back at the ranch, as they unloaded supplies, Tommy rushed up to the buckboard. "Boss, we've got trouble," he said breathlessly. "Judge sent me to find you. Fence on the north pasture's been cut. 20 head missing." Vaughn's expression hardened. "Blackwell. Judge figured the same. He's organizing men to track them. Tell him I'll be there directly." As Tommy hurried off, Vaughn turned to Cordelia. "I'm sorry, you'll need to finish unloading without me. Of course. Go." Impulsively, she touched his arm. "Be careful." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps at her concern. Then he nodded and strode toward the main house. For the next 3 days, most of the ranch hands were absent, tracking the stolen cattle. Cordelia kept meals ready at all hours as men returned in shifts to rest before heading out again. The atmosphere at the ranch was tense, with even the judge taking part in the search. On the third night, Cordelia was awakened by the sound of horses and men's voices. Pulling on a robe over her nightdress, she peered out her window to see riders entering the ranch yard. In the moonlight, she could make out Vaughn dismounting, his movements stiff with exhaustion. Without thinking twice, she lit a lamp and hurried to the kitchen. By the time the men began filing in, she had coffee brewing and was heating leftover stew from supper. "Miss Rose," the judge said in surprise when he entered, "you shouldn't be up at this hour." "I heard you return," she replied, pouring coffee for each man. "You must be hungry." The gratitude in their tired eyes was all the thanks she needed. As she served them, she noted that several men bore minor injuries, cuts, and bruises that spoke of confrontation. Vaughn was the last to enter, his face drawn with fatigue and a bloodied cloth wrapped around his forearm. "You're hurt," Cordelia said, abandoning the coffee pot to examine his arm. "It's nothing," he muttered. "Caught some barbed wire." "Sit down and let me look at it properly," she insisted. When he hesitated, she added more softly, "Please, Vaughn." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and something in his expression shifted. He sat at the kitchen table while she gathered clean cloths and water. "Did you recover the cattle?" she asked as she carefully unwrapped his makeshift bandage. "Most of them." "Caught up to Blackwell and his men near the territorial border." He winced slightly as she cleaned the wound. "They won't be troubling this county again." Cordelia paused, looking up at him. "What happened?" They resisted. "Sheriff's deputy was with us, made it official." His eyes met hers. "They're alive, if that's what you're asking. Headed for trial in Denver." Relief flooded through her. She hadn't wanted to think of him killing, even in justice. "This needs stitching," she said, examining the deep cut. "Doc can do it in the morning." "Doc's half asleep and has already tended 5 other men," Cordelia argued. "I can do it now. I've stitched wounds before." Vaughn studied her face, then nodded. "All right." Cordelia gathered needle, thread, and whiskey for disinfection. As she worked, Vaughn remained silent, his only reaction an occasional tensing when the needle pierced particularly sensitive flesh. "You have a steady hand," he observed as she tied off the last stitch. "My father taught me. Said it was a useful skill for anyone, not just doctors." She bandaged the wound carefully. "You should rest now. The wound needs time to heal." "Thank you," he said quietly as she finished. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, something unspoken passing between them. "You're welcome," she replied softly. "I'm glad you returned safely." In the days following the rustling incident, Cordelia noticed subtle changes in her interactions with Vaughn. He sought her company more frequently, finding reasons to visit the kitchen beyond mere ranch business. Sometimes he would sit quietly at the kitchen table while she worked, occasionally offering to help with heavier tasks. A week before the judge's social gathering, Vaughn found Cordelia in the kitchen garden, harvesting vegetables for the evening meal. "Need an extra pair of hands?" he offered, kneeling beside her. "Always," she replied with a smile, handing him an empty basket. "The carrots are ready to be pulled." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the garden. "Gardens flourishing under your care," Vaughn observed, "was nearly dead when you arrived." "It just needed attention," Cordelia replied. "Like most living things." Vaughn's hands stilled. "You've brought more than good food to Diamond, Cordelia?" She looked up, surprised by both his use of her given name and the sentiment. "Have I? Place feels different. More like—" he hesitated, searching for words. "More like home again." The simple statement touched her deeply. "I'm glad. It's become home to me as well, more quickly than I expected." His gaze met hers, intensity building between them. For a moment, Cordelia thought he might say more, might reach for her hand. Instead, he cleared his throat and returned to harvesting carrots. "Judge is expecting at least 50 guests for the gathering," he said, changing the subject. "Ordered a new dress for you from Denver. Said you needed something appropriate for hosting." "That's very generous of him," Cordelia replied, hiding her disappointment at the shift in conversation. "He thinks highly of you." Vaughn paused. "We all do." The day of the social gathering arrived with perfect early autumn weather. The ranch had been transformed, with tables set up on the lawn and lanterns strung between trees. Ranch hands, clean-shaven and dressed in their Sunday best, helped arrange chairs and move furniture according to Cordelia's directions. The dress the judge had provided was more elegant than anything Cordelia had ever owned, a deep burgundy silk with delicate lace trim that complemented her chestnut hair and fair complexion perfectly. Standing before the small mirror in her room, she hardly recognized herself. A knock at her door announced the judge's arrival to escort her to the gathering. "My dear Miss Rose," he said appreciatively when she opened the door, "you look absolutely radiant." "Thank you, sir," she replied, smoothing the silk nervously. "I hope everything meets your expectations for today." "It already exceeds them," the judge assured her, offering his arm. "Now come. Our guests are arriving, and I want everyone to meet the woman responsible for Diamond A's renaissance." The afternoon and evening passed in a whirl of introductions, compliments on the food, and conversations with ranchers' wives eager to learn Cordelia's recipes. She barely had time to notice Vaughn moving among the guests, looking handsome and somewhat uncomfortable in formal attire. As twilight descended and lanterns were lit, musicians hired from town began to play. Couples moved to the cleared area for dancing, their figures casting long shadows in the golden light. Cordelia was supervising the serving of dessert when Vaughn appeared at her side. "You haven't stopped working all day," he observed. "There's still much to do," she replied, though in truth, the serving staff from town had everything well in hand. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. Cordelia stared at him in surprise. "I didn't know you danced." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "There's a lot you don't know about me yet." The word "yet" sent a flutter through her chest. She placed her hand in his outstretched palm. "Then I accept." Vaughn led her to the dancing area, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while holding her other hand. As they began to move to the music, Cordelia was surprised by his grace. "You dance very well, Mr. Alexander," she teased gently. "Had a good teacher." "My mother insisted all her sons learn properly." His expression softened with memory. "Said a man who could dance would never lack for pleasant company." "She was wise," Cordelia replied. "Where is she now?" Passed on. 10 years ago. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Pennsylvania farm where I grew up. And your brothers. 2 died in the war, one's farming the home place." Cordelia's heart ached for his losses. "I'm sorry, Vaughn," he nodded, then deliberately changed the subject. "You've impressed everyone today. Judge is prouder than if he'd arranged it all himself. It's been wonderful to use my skills for something beyond daily meals," she admitted, "though I'm looking forward to returning to normal tomorrow." Vaughn studied her face in the lantern light. "Are you happy here, Cordelia, at Diamond A?" The directness of his question caught her by surprise. "Yes," she answered honestly, "more than I expected to be." Something in his expression eased. "Good." As the music ended, he didn't immediately release her hand. Instead, he leaned closer and said quietly, "There's something I'd like to show you if you can spare a few minutes." Curiosity piqued, Cordelia nodded. "The desserts are all served. I can be spared." Vaughn led her away from the gathering, toward a path that wound behind the main house and up a gentle slope. The sounds of music and conversation faded behind them as they climbed. "Where are we going?" Cordelia asked, careful of her footing in the unfamiliar dress. "Just a little further," Vaughn replied, offering his arm for support. They crested the hill, and Cordelia gasped. Before them spread a panoramic view of the entire ranch, golden with lantern light against the deepening blue of twilight. Beyond, the Spanish peaks rose majestically against a star-filled sky. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I come here to think," Vaughn said quietly. "Wanted to share it with you." They stood in silence for a moment, absorbing the beauty of the scene. "When I first came to Diamond A," Vaughn began, his voice low, "I was broken. War had taken parts of me I thought couldn't be replaced. Judge gave me purpose, but not peace." He turned to face her. "Not until recently." Cordelia's heart quickened. "What changed? You arrived." The simplicity of his statement held profound weight. "Brought more than food to this place, Cordelia. Brought life back to it, back to me." She felt tears prick at her eyes. "Vaughn, I'm not a man of many words," he continued. "Never have been, but some things need saying." He took her hands in his. "You fed more than the ranch hands' bodies. You fed something in me that was starving. My soul, maybe." Cordelia felt tears spill onto her cheeks. "I didn't come here looking for anything but employment. Found more than that, I hope." His question held vulnerability she'd never heard from him before. "Much more," she whispered, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Vaughn leaned down and kissed her. His lips were gentle, almost reverent against hers. Cordelia responded with a tenderness that surprised her, her hands moving to rest against his chest. When they parted, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since you reorganized my kitchen on your first day." Cordelia laughed softly. "Your kitchen, is it?" "Our kitchen," he amended, "if you're willing." "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Alexander?" she asked, her voice teasing but her heart racing. "In time, everything," he replied seriously. "For now, permission to court you properly, to see where this leads us." Cordelia smiled, joy bubbling up inside her. "I think I'd like that very much." They returned to the gathering with nothing outwardly changed, though Cordelia felt as though her entire world had shifted on its axis. The judge gave them a knowing look when they reappeared, but said nothing. As autumn deepened into winter, Vaughn's courtship progressed with the same quiet determination that characterized everything he did. He began taking Sunday meals with Cordelia in the kitchen after the ranch hands had eaten, sharing stories of his life before the war, and listening attentively to her tales of Chicago. For Christmas, he presented her with a small wooden box he had carved himself, decorated with intricate patterns of leaves and flowers. "It's beautiful," Cordelia said in wonder, running her fingers over the polished surface. "Open it," Vaughn urged softly. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a silver locket. Cordelia lifted it carefully, opening it to find a tiny dried flower preserved inside. Columbine, Vaughn explained. First wildflower that bloomed near the garden after you arrived. Seemed fitting. Tears welled in Cordelia's eyes. Will you put it on for me? As Vaughn fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers brushed her skin, sending shivers down her spine. Never thought I'd find this again, he said quietly. Happiness, purpose beyond just work. Nor did I, Cordelia admitted. When my parents died, I thought that part of my life was over. Vaughn's arms encircled her, drawing her against his chest. Beginning, not ending, he murmured into her hair. On a crisp February morning, with snow blanketing the ranch in pristine white, Vaughn asked Cordelia to join him for a ride. They bundled up against the cold and set out on horseback. Cordelia much more confident on a horse than she had been months ago, thanks to Vaughn's patient teaching. He led her to a sheltered valley not far from the ranch, where a small creek ran unfrozen beneath overhanging trees. Dismounting, he helped her down and spread a blanket on a dry patch beneath a towering pine. It's peaceful here, Cordelia observed, looking around at the snow-laden landscape. Been thinking about the future, Vaughn said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Judge is getting older, talking about reducing his involvement in ranch operations. He relies on you greatly, Cordelia noted. Offered me partnership in Diamond A, Vaughn revealed. Papers already drawn up. Vaughn, that's wonderful, Cordelia exclaimed, genuinely delighted for him. There's more. He took her gloved hands in his. There's land that comes with the partnership, good site for a house just over that ridge. He nodded toward the west. Private but close enough to the main operations. Cordelia's pulse quickened. A house. Our house, Vaughn said softly, if you'll have me as your husband. Joy bubbled up in Cordelia's chest as Vaughn reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small ring with a modest diamond flanked by tiny sapphires. Belonged to my grandmother, he explained. My mother saved it for whichever son found true love. It's perfect, Cordelia whispered as he slipped it onto her finger over her glove. Is that a yes? Vaughn asked, a rare, full smile transforming his features. Yes, Cordelia replied, laughing through happy tears. 1,000 times yes. Their kiss was warmer than the winter sun, a promise of the life they would build together. They were married in April, when the land was awakening from winter's grip. The ceremony was held outdoors at Diamond A, with the Spanish peaks providing a majestic backdrop. Judge Anderson gave Cordelia away, his eyes suspiciously damp beneath his dignified exterior. Ranch hands and townspeople alike gathered to witness the union of the taciturn foreman and the cook, who had transformed more than just meals at Diamond A. Cordelia wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from Denver, with sprigs of fresh wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Vaughn, standing tall and proud in a new black suit, looked at her with such undisguised adoration that several of the women present dabbed at their eyes. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises of partnership and devotion spoken clearly for all to witness. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vaughn kissed Cordelia with a tenderness that belied his strength, sealing their covenant before friends and the vast Colorado sky. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music, dancing, and of course, remarkable food that Cordelia had planned, but not prepared. The judge had insisted on hiring cooks from town, so she could enjoy her own wedding feast. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the festivities, Vaughn led Cordelia away from the gathering toward waiting horses. "Where are we going?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Home," he replied simply. He had been working on their house in secret for months, with help from the ranch hands during their off hours. As they approached the ridge he had pointed out during his proposal, Cordelia caught her first glimpse of the structure nestled perfectly into the landscape. It was a sturdy two-story home built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and one side. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, suggesting someone had prepared for their arrival. "Oh, Vaughn," Cordelia breathed as they drew closer. "It's beautiful." "Not finished with everything yet," he cautioned, "but enough to start our life together." He lifted her from her horse and, before she could protest, swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Inside, Cordelia found a home already filled with thoughtful touches. The main room was warmed by a blazing fire in the stone hearth. Furniture, some new, some she recognized from purchases made in town, was arranged comfortably. Fresh flowers stood in a vase on a table set for two, but what made her gasp was the kitchen. Spacious and well-planned, it featured a modern cook stove, ample workspace, and a large window overlooking what would become a garden larger than the one at the main house. "Judge helped with the stove," Vaughn explained as she explored in wonder. "Said a baker needs proper equipment." Cordelia turned to her husband, overwhelmed with emotion. "You remembered." "Remember everything you say," he replied, drawing her into his arms. "Built-in space for a bakery operation if you want it. Town's growing. Could use good bread." Tears of joy filled Cordelia's eyes. "You've thought of everything." "Tried to," he murmured, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Want to give you the life you deserve." "You already have," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new bedroom, Vaughn's arms securely around her, Cordelia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperation that had driven her west to the contentment she now felt, every step had led her to Vaughn and the life they would build together. "What are you thinking?" Vaughn asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "About how differently things might have turned out," she replied. "If I hadn't seen that notice in Mr. Albert's store that first day, would have found each other somehow," Vaughn said with surprising certainty. "Some things are meant to be." Cordelia smiled in the darkness, pressing a kiss to his chest, over his heart. "For a man of few words, you occasionally say exactly the right thing." "Only to you," he murmured, drawing her closer. Over the following years, Diamond prospered under Vaughn's partnership with Judge Anderson. Cordelia's dream of a bakery became reality, with a small building added adjacent to their home where she created breads and pastries that quickly became famous throughout the county. 3 mornings a week, Vaughn would load her goods into a wagon and deliver them to stores in Veta and neighboring towns on his way to ranch business. Their family grew with the arrival of twins, a boy and girl they named James and Alina, after Cordelia's parents followed 2 years later by another son they called William, in honor of the judge who had brought them together. Judge Anderson himself, though gradually reducing his daily involvement in ranch operations, remained a beloved fixture in their lives, becoming a doting grandfather figure to their children. When he passed peacefully in his sleep, 7 years after their wedding, he left his controlling interest in Diamond to Vaughn, with generous provisions for all the long-term ranch hands. On a warm summer evening 10 years into their marriage, Cordelia stood on the porch of their home, watching Vaughn teaching 7-year-old James and Alina to throw a lasso while 5-year-old William toddled after them determinedly. The setting sun cast them all in golden light, turning ordinary moments into treasure. Vaughn looked up, catching her eye across the yard. A smile no longer rare but still precious spread across his face as he handed the rope to James and made his way to her. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, leaning against the porch rail beside her. "Just thinking how fortunate I am," Cordelia replied, leaning into him as his arm slipped around her waist. "When I stepped off that stagecoach in La Veta all those years ago, I never imagined finding all this." "Luckiest day of my life," Vaughn said simply. "When you walked into that kitchen and started giving orders," Cordelia laughed. "I was terrified, trying to appear confident when inside I was certain you'd send me packing within the week. Never crossed my mind." He turned her to face him. "Knew there was something special about you from the start. Just took me a while to figure out what." "And what was that?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "That you were the missing piece," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The one that made everything else make sense again." Cordelia raised herself on tiptoe to kiss him, as familiar and yet thrilling as the first time. Their children's laughter rang out across the yard, a joyful soundtrack to the life they had built together. "Mama, Papa, look," Elena called. "I did it." They turned to see their daughter successfully twirling a small lasso, her face alight with pride. "We should go see this achievement," Cordelia said with a smile. As they walked hand in hand toward their children, Cordelia reflected on the journey that had brought her west. She had come to cook for ranch hands, to earn her way in the world after loss had shattered her previous life. Instead, she had found a man whose quiet strength complemented her nurturing spirit perfectly, whose soul had hungered for exactly what she could provide. In finding Vaughn, in building their family and their legacy at Diamond A, Cordelia had discovered that nourishment came in many forms. Sometimes in the bread she baked, sometimes in the meals she prepared, but most importantly, in the love they shared feeding each other's souls, day by day, through all the seasons of their lives together.